Starting off with Dillian Whyte, his strengths: heart, tenacity, killer instinct, long jab, good work rate, better head movement than Joseph Parker, good body punching, a more consistent counter puncher than Joseph Parker, and a better inside game. Dillian Whyte's weaknesses: slower hands and feet than Joseph Parker, inferior balance to Joseph Parker, not as well coordinated, potentially 15 pounds too heavy, often reckless and overeager, leaky defense, tendency to lose his shape and throw sloppy punches, particularly in the second half of fights. Moving on to Joseph Parker, his strengths: faster hands and feet than Dillian Whyte, much better balance, better coordination, better at mid-range, more calm and composed, tighter defense than Dillian Whyte, better on the back foot, and more explosive. Joseph Parker's weaknesses: stands very upright, no head movement, limited counter punching, tendency to play it safe, inferior inside game, and shorter arms. So those are the strengths and weaknesses of the two men as I see it. Essentially, to put it in a nutshell, you're dealing with one guy who has, in my view, better hand skills against another guy who has better athleticism. And the guy with the better hand skills is Dillian Whyte. I know some people might disagree with that, but I just think that you're not paying attention closely enough when you watch Dillian Whyte fight. There's a lot of catch and shoot when he fights, a lot of counter punching, head movement, going from the head to the body with a jab. There's a lot of pretty sophisticated boxing moves with Dillian Whyte. It's just his athleticism pales in comparison to Joseph Parker, and a man with superior athleticism can sometimes outbox a man with superior hand skills. All right. And I don't necessarily want to go as far as saying Dillian Whyte's got better boxing skills than Joseph Parker, because I think boxing skills have to incorporate footwork as well. And Dillian Whyte's footwork is not great, but when it comes to his hand skills, I think they're superior to Joseph Parker's. I think Joseph Parker is a more basic fighter in terms of what he does with his hands than Dillian Whyte is. But that athleticism that he has might allow him to overcome the superior hand skills of Dillian Whyte, and also his footwork might allow him to overcome the hand skills of Dillian Whyte. And just an example of how a superior athlete can overcome a superior boxer and actually outbox a superior boxer. A historical example would be Roy Jones Jr. versus James Toney. And I know neither Joseph Parker nor Dillian Whyte can be compared to Roy Jones Jr. or James Toney in terms of their level of skill, but it's just an example of how a superior athlete in Roy Jones Jr., who was a freakish athlete, in fact, he's the most talented athlete I've ever seen in boxing, a prime Roy Jones, okay? Unbelievable athleticism. And then you had James Toney in the other corner, who had much better boxing skills, much better hand skills, should I say, than Roy Jones. Much more sophisticated in terms of what he did in the ring with his hands. But Roy Jones's athleticism was able to completely nullify James Toney's superior boxing skills. And that fight wasn't even close. It was a complete whitewash on the cards. Roy Jones Jr. won it hands down. It was actually easy work for him, because his athleticism was so insane that for all the skills James Toney had, he could not keep up with the speed, the reflexes. He just couldn't do anything. James Toney is one of the greatest counterpunchers I've ever seen. But Roy Jones Jr. was so fast that James Toney's counters were hitting thin air. You see? Now, I'm not expecting Joseph Parker to win by a whitewash if he does defeat Dillian Whyte on points. Okay? I'm expecting it to be much closer. Obviously, the athleticism gap between Parker and Whyte is not as wide as it was between Roy Jones Jr. and James Toney. Okay? Because Roy Jones Jr. was just a freak, once in a generation type of athlete. But I do see there being a possibility that Joseph Parker's superior athleticism could overcome Dillian Whyte's superior hand skills. Now, one thing which a couple of people have said to me, people who are picking Dillian Whyte about this fight, they've said that Dillian Whyte's got more dog in him. And by that they mean he's got more determination, he's got more tenacity. We know that Dillian Whyte is not going to be found wanting when it comes to desire, his will to win. Whereas Joseph Parker is a bit wishy-washy at times. You look at the Kajanu fight, you look at the Ruiz fight, you look at the Takam fight, and you think, is that a man who's really willing to put it all on the line to secure victory? Or is that a man who tries to do just enough to get by and doesn't like to push himself above and beyond? And obviously in the Joshua fight too, when his O was on the line, when his world title was on the line, when he had, 3 other belts to gain? 2 or 3 other belts to gain? Where was his tenacity? Where was his fight? I was very disappointed with him in that fight. But in retrospect, maybe I should have paid more attention to the way he'd fought in other fights. I know it was the Joshua fight. I thought maybe he would change for that particular fight, but he didn't change. The safety first approach. You've really got almost polar opposites when it comes to the characters of both men. Dillian Whyte is a guy who actually tries too hard a lot of the time. He goes for the KO a little bit too much. He's a little bit over-eager. And being over-eager, he can sometimes run into trouble. He's a very fiery character, a very intense character, Dillian Whyte. Joseph Parker being almost the exact opposite. He's a bit too cool for school, isn't he? He don't step on the gas when maybe he should. Dillian Whyte's a guy who loves exchanging and loves exchanging maybe a bit too much. Joseph Parker tends to avoid exchanges. If you watch his fights, the guy doesn't really like exchanging. I'm not saying he never exchanges. I'm not saying he won't exchange at times against Dillian Whyte. But for the most part, he's not a guy that likes exchanging. He likes his athleticism to work for him. Kind of like David Haye. If you watch David Haye fight, he don't like exchanging with people. He likes to outspeed you, outmaneuver you. Or he doesn't like to actually stand with you and start exchanging. For most of his career anyway. We saw what happened when he exchanged with Bellew, right? David Haye's whole style was about being faster than you on the outside, being faster than you at long range. It was very basic actually, just move around the ring, wait for the other guy to lunge in, off balance, and then clip him with something. That's pretty much David Haye's whole game. Certainly when he was fighting at heavyweight against bigger men. That was pretty much his whole game. Joseph Parker, a similar situation. What I will say about Joseph Parker is though, he's a lot more active with the jab than David Haye was, throws a lot more body shots. He's obviously a lot more upright than David Haye. His head movement is not as good. But in terms of what he's doing, in terms of the mechanics of what he's doing against a Ruiz, against a Takam, it's similar to what Haye was doing. Moving around, waiting for them to lunge in and then cracking them with something. It wasn't very sophisticated. Dillian Whyte's approach is more sophisticated than that. The catch and shoot from Dillian Whyte, the counter punching from Dillian Whyte, head and body with the jab, setting things up. It's a more sophisticated approach, but I think people overlook it because of the fact that Dillian Whyte's athleticism is far inferior to Joseph Parker's athleticism. Dillian Whyte doesn't keep his shape as well as Joseph Parker. Dillian Whyte isn't as well coordinated. His balance isn't as good. But in terms of what, the mechanics of of what he's doing, the mechanics of what he's doing, are more sophisticated than the mechanics of what Joseph Parker's doing. You don't really see Joseph Parker, doing catch and shoot a lot of the time, or counter punching a lot of the time. You don't really see much of that from Joseph Parker. He's far more reliant on his athleticism than he is sophisticated boxing moves. And again, that might be enough for him here against Dillian Whyte. But as many have said, if it does come down to a dogfight, if both of them are tired, and it is about who has the greater will, then in that situation, you have to imagine Dillian Whyte is going to come out on top. I've been back and forth about this fight in terms of who I think is going to win, and I'm really not sure. And I don't like making predictions when it's just a total stab in the dark, because then you're just making a prediction for prediction's sake. And the reason I don't like making predictions in those circumstances is because if I get the prediction right, I can't take any credit for that, because it was just a total blind guess. Any person off the street who has never watched a boxing match in their life has got a 50-50 chance of getting any prediction right. So what if they get a prediction right for any particular fight? Does that make them a boxing expert? No. It was a blind guess. It was pot luck. And so I don't like making predictions when it's a blind guess, when I'm really not sure who's going to win. But what I will say, and I did make a prediction on my Facebook, in my Facebook boxing group yesterday, and I picked Joseph Parker on points via close decision. But I'm going to have to reverse that, to be honest with you, and say I'm really not sure. I can see how both men could win the fight. I think if the fight ends by knockout, it will be Joseph Parker scoring the knockout. But the most likely scenario in my head is that this fight goes the distance. That's the most likely scenario in my head. And again, why do I think Joseph Parker is more likely to score a knockout than Dillian Whyte? Well, for some of the reasons I've already mentioned, the fact that Dillian Whyte is more reckless than Joseph Parker. He goes for it more than Parker. He leaves himself open more. He falls off balance more. He's just more defensively vulnerable in general than Parker. And Parker is very sudden with his punches. I don't think Parker is a massive puncher, but he's more sudden with his shots. He's far more likely to catch Dillian Whyte with some punch that Whyte doesn't see. And for that reason, I think he's more likely to score a KO. Parker, Dillian Whyte is, I don't think, fast enough to catch Parker by surprise. And I think Parker is quick enough, even if he does get hurt, to get away and prevent Dillian Whyte from finishing him. And Parker is just a more cautious fighter in general. He doesn't like exchanging. He's not going to make all the defensive mistakes that Dillian Whyte often makes. He's not going to be as reckless defensively. And because of that, I think it's unlikely that Joseph Parker gets stopped. One thing which interests me, and has done since the very day this fight was signed, is the tactics Joseph Parker's going to use. How much movement will he actually use? Because if he really does intend to stand in front of Dillian Whyte and start swapping punches, or is trying to box with Dillian Whyte, I think he's going to come off second best in a lot of the time. If he just comes out and takes center ring, right, and he's trying to jab with Dillian Whyte and he's trying to throw long range punches with Dillian Whyte, I think Dillian Whyte may get the better of it. I think Dillian Whyte's jab is going to hit Joseph Parker a lot if he's standing in front of Dillian Whyte. I think Dillian Whyte's jab is going to hit Joseph Parker a lot if Parker stands in front of him. Whyte has got the longer arms. I think Whyte will be able to land counter punches and what have you against Joseph Parker. On the inside, I think Dillian Whyte is also better. I just think in the mid-range is where Joseph Parker's dangerous. And he has to use his feet to mess around with the range. He can't just stay at one range all the time unless he's, all the way out. But then if he's all the way out, Whyte won't be able to hit him and he won't be able to hit Whyte. I just think he needs to double up on his jab, move around a lot, keep Dillian Whyte off balance by constantly moving around the ring, and then jump in, get to mid-range, let combinations off, and then move around again. When Dillian Whyte gets tired later on in the fight, then Joseph Parker can maybe stand and trade with him a little bit, if Dillian Whyte is, sufficiently depleted. Then Joseph Parker might have more success up close. But in the early rounds, I think it's best for Joseph Parker to employ a fair amount of movement. Not running around the ring, but a fair amount of movement. And as I say, don't stand in front of Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte's counter-punching skills are better than a lot of people realize, and his jab is more effective than a lot of people realize. So, yeah, these are my final thoughts before the fight. I'm really not sure who's going to win. But what I will say is I think it's likely to go the distance. Because when you look at the track record of both men, neither guy has proven to be a prolific puncher at, even fringe world level, never mind world level. And what I mean by prolific puncher is, I'm not saying that they're not big punchers. I'm not saying that they don't have the power to hurt each other. What I'm saying is, neither one of them have scored a lot of knockouts when they've stepped up. And that shows that, well, perhaps there's a lack of power, but perhaps it's a case of them not having enough ability at the higher level. Maybe Dillian Whyte's just not fast enough at top level to be able to land his big punches consistently fight after fight. Maybe Joseph Parker's not sophisticated enough in his approach. Maybe he's not aggressive enough to be able to land his knockout punches consistently fight after fight. So neither man is a prolific puncher. So they might have the power to hurt each other, but how likely is it that they're going to land those big punches consistently in the fight, consistently enough in the fight to be hurting each other? I have my doubts about either of them being able to do that based upon their previous performances. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if there was a stoppage, but I would be firmly expecting Joseph Parker to stop Dillian Whyte. What would surprise me is if Whyte stopped Parker. That would actually surprise me. I'm not going to lie. That is one outcome that would genuinely surprise me. Because I just think the athleticism gap, the speed gap, will not allow Dillian Whyte to stop Joseph Parker. All right? But again, most likely outcome for me is that this goes to points. And that is close. I don't see this as being a whitewash for either man. I could end up with egg on my face there, but I don't see it being a whitewash for either man. I wouldn't be surprised if we see knockdowns in this fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Dillian Whyte hit the canvas, more so than Parker. But Dillian Whyte's tenacity, his will to win, his desire, and the hand skills that he does have, and potentially the physical strength, he's weighing 260 pounds in this fight. Will that allow him to bully Joseph Parker on the inside and push him back and make it physical? Perhaps it will. Perhaps it will. Perhaps he'll be going for that. Perhaps he'll be trying to emulate what Carlos Takam did. And Takam was able to bully Joseph Parker. And let's talk about the chin as well, because a lot of people are questioning Dillian Whyte's chin. I think Dillian Whyte has got a decent chin. And again, when you look at Joseph Parker against Carlos Takam, he never came close to dropping Takam, much less stopping him. Does Takam have, and he did hit Takam with plenty of good shots, does Takam have a better chin than Dillian Whyte? I would say no. No. You look at Takam when he fought Joshua. The first time Takam got hit with clean shots from Joshua, he was on the canvas in the 4th round. Dillian Whyte, yeah, he got knocked out clean by Joshua, but he got hit with a hell of a load of clean punches from Anthony Joshua through 6.5 rounds before he went down. He got hit by Joshua with way more clean punches than Takam got hit with. And he took them better until he was tired and couldn't take any more. He was totally exhausted by the 7th round. And he'd taken God knows how many clean Anthony Joshua power punches. So I think Dillian Whyte's chin is at least as good as Takam's, if not a bit better. And people say, well, he was hurt in the Chisora fight. I don't think he was really that hurt in the Chisora fight. I think he was a little buzzed once or twice, but because he sometimes gets wild and because his balance looks poor at times, it made it look worse than it was in terms of him being hurt. So I really don't buy this idea that he was badly hurt against Chisora. No, Chisora had some dramatic moments, and because of Dillian Whyte's poor balance and the fact that he swings back wildly at times, it made it look worse than he was. But I was looking at his eyes and he seemed fine to me throughout the Chisora fight. He never seemed in any serious trouble at all. He was under pressure, of course. He was taking shots, but I never saw Dillian Whyte seriously hurt in that fight at all. The Robert Helenius fight, however, that is different. In the Helenius fight, he was genuinely hurt. I know what a guy looks like when he's genuinely hurt. And Helenius cracked him. Was it in the second round? I think it was the second round. That genuinely hurt Dillian Whyte. Okay? That's the only time I've seen Dillian Whyte genuinely hurt outside of the Joshua fight. Yeah? Now, some people might say, whoa, you see, if Helenius is hurting him like that, Joseph Parker's going to. Well, go and watch the first round of Robert Helenius versus Derek Chisora. Derek Chisora got hurt too in the first round against Helenius. You go watch it. Helenius, for all his flaws, and there are many, is a tremendous puncher. He always had power. And he had Del Boy backing up and holding on in the first round. Go watch that fight. I'm not lying to you. Go watch that fight. And we know Del Boy's got a great chin. So if Helenius hurts Del Boy in the first round and has him backing up and holding on, then why is it such a damning indictment of Dillian Whyte's chin that Whyte got hurt by Helenius? That's the question. So, yeah, I don't think Dillian Whyte's chin is that bad. I think he's got a pretty decent chin. And I don't think Joseph Parker is a prolific puncher. So, yeah, Dillian Whyte will get reckless. He might get tagged here and there. But when I'm looking at probabilities, I'm just thinking that it's probable that the fight will go the distance. It's probable that although Parker has the ability to knock Dillian Whyte out, I think it's unlikely that that's going to happen. I'm expecting a distance fight, people. I'm looking forward to it. I hope it's an entertaining spectacle. I hope it's fight of the year. I hope it's, all of the above. And one thing I certainly hope is that it's a fair decision. I don't mind if it's a split decision, if it's a majority decision, as long as it's fair. And some people say the Dillian Whyte Derek Chisora fight in terms of the scorecards weren't fair. Total BS. Total BS. At the time when I watched Dillian Whyte Derek Chisora, I actually scored the fight for Chisora. I thought he nicked it by a point or two. But subsequently, having watched it back, I actually scored it for Dillian Whyte. I've watched it back a couple of times since, and I actually thought Dillian Whyte nicked it by a point or two. I think Derek Chisora had more dramatic moments in the fight. And dramatic moments stick in people's heads. But when you look at most of the rounds and the entirety of the round, Dillian Whyte was the more consistent. There were so many rounds, particularly in the second half of the fight, where Derek Chisora was doing absolutely nothing. He was just sitting on the ropes the whole round doing nothing, and Dillian Whyte was winning on work rate. Dillian Whyte's punches were not very high quality, but at least he was throwing them. Derek Chisora was doing nothing for large periods of the round. You're telling me you're giving them rounds to Chisora? You can't. So although the dramatic moments were mainly in favor of Derek Chisora in that fight, if you score the fight objectively, round by round, you break each round down minute by minute, who won this minute, who won that minute, you'll never say that fight was a robbery. You'll say that fight was close and could have gone either way. But a robbery? Ridiculous. People come out with a statement that Whyte lost that fight or Chisora won that fight as if it's a fact. It's not a fact. It's your opinion. How can a close fight be a robbery? There was no robbery. If you think Del Boy nicked it by a round or two, cool. But don't start taking issue with people who think that Dillian Whyte nicked it by a round or two, because it was a close fight, you know? And again, I got caught up in the moment a little bit when I watched the fight the first time. And in my head, Chisora had done better than he actually had. And again, watching it back the second, third times, I was like, actually, Del Boy didn't do as well as I initially thought. And Whyte was doing more than I realized, you know? So anyway, that's an aside. If it's a close fight like that, I won't have any complaints no matter who wins, whether it's Parker winning a close decision like that or Whyte. But I don't want to see any nonsense. Some people have said that Joseph Parker can't win a close decision against an Eddie Hearn fighter. And that might be true. But bear in mind, last I checked, Dillian Whyte is working with Eddie Hearn on a fight-by-fight basis. There's no long-term contract as far as I'm aware. And also, as an outsider, okay, I think most of us have probably observed that Dillian Whyte and Eddie Hearn are not exactly best buddies. They've got a working relationship, but both of them have expressed frustration at dealing with the other on many occasions. So, would Eddie Hearn really go all out to try and ensure that Dillian Whyte gets a decision, even if he don't deserve one? Is Dillian Whyte really that much of a house fighter that the officials are gonna compromise what integrity they might have in order to ensure that he gets a victory over Joseph Parker? Possibly, but then again, maybe not. Joseph Parker is virtually a matchroom fighter anyway at this point, isn't he? I know he works with David Higgins, Duco Events, but David Higgins has come out in recent times and said that Eddie Hearn is the greatest promoter in the world, and Eddie Hearn this and Eddie Hearn that. I mean, does David Higgins actually work for Eddie Hearn at this point? I'm not saying he does. I'm just asking a question because he's become very, very close to Eddie Hearn. And Parker has become very, very entrenched in the matchroom universe, you know? So, again, I'm just talking about potential favoritism that the officials might have for Dillian Whyte. I'm not necessarily sure that there will be any when it comes to Joseph Parker. I could be wrong. Anyway, these are my meandering, scattered thoughts, final thoughts ahead of this fight. Let me know how you guys feel in the comment section below. Will Joseph Parker's superior footwork and athleticism overcome Dillian Whyte's superior hand skills and greater tenacity? Yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Who you picking? It's happening. I'm out.